All right. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. We're going to continue on. I promise you tonight, we're going to talk a lot more than just two verses. But if you were not here last week, make sure you go back on YouTube and watch last week because we talked about a lot of the introduction stuff and how we get to verse 1 and 2 and we talked about what verse 1 and 2 mean, where the preacher, the son of David, the king in Jerusalem, he says, vanity of all vanities. Says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And so tonight what we're going to do is we're going to move on from there. Not really, but we're going to move on to the next set of verses and kind of see what what Solomon goes on to say here. But in order to kind of illustrate big picture and even as it applies specifically to the text tonight, I want us to kind of take a journey in our mind to imagine for a second. Hopefully you've seen this, but have you ever been on the beach and there's like a kid and he's chasing the seagulls around and it seems like he's going to get them, but like he gets right there to them and they just take off and then he just keeps running. It's like he's going to get right there and then they take off again. And the kid is just living a dream, right? He's laughing, he's having a good time, and no matter how close he gets, it just keeps getting away from him. That, by definition, is futility, all right? That is exactly what it means for something to be futile. And so that's also the message that Solomon is communicating to us about things in this world. Basically, Solomon's message to us is that all the pursuits, the human pursuits in this world, they're like the seagulls, and we're like the little boy on the beach. We're running after those things. They just keep, when we think we're getting a hold of them, they just keep slipping further and further away, and we get close again, and it just happens over and over again. And Solomon, who's the wisest man, all right, when he's talking about and thinking about these endless pursuits, this is the question that he asks. He says, what do we really gain from all of our toil and striving under the sun? So that's the first question, really, in verse 3 that he asks in this text. And he's just said everything is vanity, all right? And then he follows it up with, what do we really gain from all of this? What do we gain from our work, from striving under the sun? And what we're going to see is Solomon illustrate this question in a bunch of different ways tonight as we look at the text. But ultimately, what we're going to find out is that the picture that Solomon's painting, it's not a depressing or a bleak picture. It's just he's trying to connect this to us in a very real way. He wants us to see. He doesn't want to just give us an illustration of what futility and vanity looks like. He wants us to actually see it with our own eyes, understand it with our own minds. All right? And so what he does here in these verses we're going to look at tonight, we're going to look at verses 3 through 11. But what he does is he's driving us to look beyond the surface of this life and confront the really hard questions, right? That's what Ecclesiastes is about, asking the hard questions. We talked about what is the meaning of life, what's the purpose of life. Those are hard questions, right? But it's beyond just those questions, because some of the things that we're going to talk about as we run through this is, one, why does so much of what we pursue leave us empty? And we don't often ask that question out loud, but we should. Why does so much of what we pursue leave us empty? What about this? Is there any gain in the repetitive cycles of life, or is everything really meaningless? And again, I recognize that when you just take those questions at face value, it does seem a little bleak. But when you go into them and you begin to answer them, what you realize is that the Bible is absolutely true. The pursuit of these worldly things is futile. It is fleeting. It is meaningless. And so Solomon, what he's doing is he's pointing out these kind of hard truths so that we'll look beyond the surface level of, man, this is hard, and look beyond that to say, okay, well, then where do I find meaning? Where do I find purpose? Where do I find drive? Right? Where do I find all these things? And I think what Solomon is doing is he's confronting us with the hard stuff so that we look at it beyond what we're going to talk about tonight, under the sun, and look above that, right? Look with an eternal perspective at things. This is what Solomon says, beginning in verse 3. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes to the north, and round goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they will flow again. All things are full of weariness, a man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which is said, see, this is new? It's already in the ages before us. It has been already in the ages before us. There's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the later things, yet to become among those who come after. Now, this question that Solomon brings to the table in verse 3, what is it gain? What gain is it, right? I want to talk about kind of how we did last week in these first two verses. We're just going to kind of work through each of the verses and what they're saying, and then talk about what they're saying, because I think that's the best way for us to really take hold of the message that Solomon is bringing to us. And I think this question that Solomon asks in verse 3 is important, because I think it gives us direction to the rest of the text. Because the rest of the text is really going to be, and I mean the rest of the chapters, it really is, the question is that's always going to come down to is, what do we gain from what we're doing under the sun? What are we gaining here? And so he says, what does man gain? The word there for gain it's a Hebrew word, and it's yethron. Yethron. It means what profit or advantage. It's actually a business word. And if you're a business person in this room, you know this word. It's the word that you would use when you're calculating what is going to be my return on my investment, right? So if you're about to take on some project, you're going to ask, well, what's going to be the return of that project? What am I getting out of it, right? If you're going to buy property and remodel, you're going to first ask, am I going to make money? What's going to be the return on my investment in this, right? That's the word that Solomon is using here. What is the return on my investment? What lasting profit or enduring benefit do I really obtain from all of this work that I'm doing in this world? That's the long and short of the question that he asked. And he's not throwing out, I promise you, he's not throwing out the reality of tangible rewards like wealth, success, and accomplishment. He's not saying that those things won't be a reality in your life, but what he's saying is that if you work for the sake of your rewards, you will. That's what you'll gain. You'll gain earthly rewards. But at Solomon's wisdom would say back to you, but when you wake up the next morning thinking that you've been fulfilled by the accomplishments of yesterday, you will wake up the next morning just as empty as you woke up the morning before. You're going to desire to pursue that day and the work of that day in order to feel accomplished again. And I think what Solomon is doing here is he's again driving us to think deeper. Do any of these things really provide for us? Does wealth, success, accomplishment, do those things provide for us real and lasting value? Real and lasting value. And what Solomon is doing is he's setting up a very real tension that exists that, again, we don't really talk about a lot in the world. The church, we talk about it a little bit more. But there's a tension that exists between that which is temporary, those earthly things, and those things that are eternal, those things that have eternal significance, right? Those are two different things. And so Solomon says here, what does man gain by all of the toil? Now, the Hebrew word for toil is the word amal, and it means not just work. So if your translation of the Bible has work there, it's not work. It's literally, it's back-breaking, strenuous, pain sort of work, right? So it's not just every day I get up and I have to go to an office that I hate or a job that I hate, or I have to go do this, and it's every day fully in the grind. It is terrible, hard work. And we see this, again, from Scripture, because it's work in a Genesis chapter 3 world, right? That when God is divvying out the curses in Genesis chapter 3, what does he tell Adam? Man, it's by the sweat of your brow now, right? You're going to have to put in a lot of work. And the ground that was giving you good and only good things is now, because of the curse, because of your sinfulness in the world, the ground that once brought life, right, from the tree, from the ground, brought life, is now going to bring thorns and thistles. It's going to be hard. You're going to have to toil. You're going to have to work, right? And it's going to be sweaty, and it's going to be hard, and you're not going to like it, and there's going to be struggles. And the word here for toil, it's the idea of not just difficulty, but weariness. It's not just that you're working, it's that you're burdened by the work. Right? You're burdened by following the attempts to find meaning and purpose and fulfillment. It's a burden. It's not fun. It's not exciting. And by using this word, what Solomon is doing is he's pointing us to the fact that basically, that all the energy, all the time, all the effort that people are investing in their careers and their relationships and their ambitions, most of the time, leads you to frustration. It leads you to fatigue. You're tired. Right? People say it all the time. Relationships are what? Work. So even that thing that we long for, that we think, if I find the perfect person, I'm going to be fulfilled. What happens? You find the perfect person and you realize, I have to work to love this person. Right? We understand that that's a part of the curse. That's a part of the reality of sin in this world, is that even the very thing that all of us desire, a healthy, good, mutually beneficial relationship where both parties are honored, what we realize is that even that, when you find that, you go to bed feeling real good, and then your wife has a dream, and something happened in that dream, and you wake up the next morning, and all of a sudden it's not good. You didn't even do anything, right? It's work. It's work. I'll hear about that later. It'll be fine. Unfortunately, I didn't write that down. I just said it, and now I can't take it back. So this is what it is. So he says, what does man gain by all the toil at which he toils, right? Again, what do we gain from all the work at which he works? Why is Solomon repeating that? Because it's important. He wants us to get on our mind the issue of work, toiling, this sort of back-breaking work, the physical and mental effort it takes for us as humans to function in this world, right? As we strive, as we live every single day. And the question that Solomon is asking here, it's not a philosophical question, it's an existential question. It's about our existence. Why are people wearing themselves out? Like, what's the point of all of this? Right? And I've counseled people, and they have found themselves at that point in their life. They say, man, what is the point of all of this? Like everything that I worked for and built my life on is gone. What's the point? That's a good time in somebody's life to say, you probably want to turn over to the book of Ecclesiastes. Because Solomon found himself in that same spot. What's the point of all this work that I'm doing under the sun? 30 times in Ecclesiastes, the phrase under the sun is used, and it is key to understanding what Solomon is saying. Solomon is talking about life from a purely human viewpoint, confined to the existence on this planet right now, and he's separating that out from God's eternal perspective. Right? We'll see kind of how he brings that in at other points, but when he's talking under the sun, he's talking about looking at everything right here, that which is in front of you. Right? Not into eternity, not from God's perspective, but purely from a human perspective. And he's not dismissing the value of work, right? He's not doing that either. But what he's doing is he's narrowing the scope. He's kind of bringing things in a little bit closer. He's looking at life under the sun, life that's bound by space and time. So not eternal life, but life right now, right here, right in this moment. Life that's characterized by temporary things, right? Life that's limited, right? It's limited by death, right? The end of this life. And he's asking what profit there is in a life that is viewed only from a horizontal earthly perspective. So that's his contention here. What value does all of my work have when I look at my work and my life from a purely earthly perspective as to finding fulfillment and hope? And then what he does, beginning in verse 4, is he starts to talk about these processes in creation and in the world and realities of the world that show us just how repetitive things are, all right? And this sort of circular repetitive pattern that exists in creation, and we're going to talk about it. In verse 4, he says, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. A generation goes and a generation comes. Why does he say that? He's pointing out to us the reality that humanity and human life is quickly passing by. A generation goes and a new one comes, right? People die and people are born, right? Ideas and perspectives live for a generation, and then a new generation comes along and they have their own ideas. A generation rises, it makes its mark in human history, and then it fades away, right? And it's replaced by another generation. Right? And the truth of the matter is, one of the things this shows us from a human perspective is how relentless the passage of time is. You cannot stop time. You cannot slow time down. Right? Time is passing. It's fleeting. And Solomon uses this picture of a generation going and a generation coming to express to us, to show us how very short our human experience is. And it doesn't matter how successful or important a generation may seem. Doesn't matter. It's going to pass away. You can idolize a generation. You can put up monuments. And those things are important. I'm not downplaying, and Solomon is not downplaying those things. But there will come a time in the future where potentially names on a monument won't be recognized. New people are born, they grow, they live, they die. And then the process repeats itself over and over and over and over again. And the way that Solomon communicates this in Hebrew, the word for coming and going, it literally means, the verbs literally mean constant, never-ending movement. So it's not that you have a generation, it's like this. It's always a generation coming, a generation going. There's always death and life, all those things, they're always happening. Right? And so Solomon comes along and he says, man, think about the lasting significance of human achievement, of generational achievement, and how quickly they will be forgotten. That generation goes and a new generation comes. But the earth remains forever. In contrast to human generations passing by, Solomon says, but the earth remains forever. While people come and go, the earth is unchanged and unmoved by passing generations. It means the natural world, that's the mountains, the rivers, the ocean, they outlast us. When we turn back to dust, the Pacific Ocean is still doing its thing. Right? The Smoky Mountains, they're still doing their thing. Right? That the earth is unchanged, unmoved by the fact that generations come and generations go. What Solomon wants us to do is reflect on the idea that the earth, which is inanimate, right? It has no ability to think or plan. It has, at least it seems to have, more permanence and stability than human life. Human life is full of ambition and dreams and hopes and struggles, and what Solomon says is that it's the earth that remains forever. Now, remains forever doesn't mean that it exists eternally, but it does remind us, again, of the repetitive patterns of nature compared to, right, the reality that generations of people come and go. So even though the natural world, even though creation has its own cycles and processes, it lives on for centuries and millennia, while on the other hand, us as human beings, the pinnacle of God's creation, our life is like a vapor. Here for a moment, gone. And all those things should drive us to ask the question, what really lasts then? Verses 5 through 7, Solomon talks about life under the sun, and what we're about to talk about is, no matter how dynamic and no matter how powerful the natural world, no matter how powerful and dynamic it is, even that is governed by endless cycles. So it's not just, yeah, the earth remains forever, but even within creation, even creation itself, again, these cycles of repetition. The sun rises, sun sets, right? And does the same thing over and over again. The wind blows and it circles back forever on this sort of circuit movement, right? These repetitive cycles, and they are going to do what they're going to do regardless of whether we're here or not, right? So I know that there's a group of people out there right now that think the most pressing issue in all of creation is climate change. But the promise of Scripture is, so long as the earth remains, there will be seed time and harvest. There will be seasons. There will be change. That's just the way it is. And the earth is existing on these repetitive cycles, but repetitive cycles given to us by the sovereign God of creation. And these cycles will take place until God makes the decision that this creation is over, right, at the end of the age, when He returns and the new heavens and the new earth become the home for those who believe. And so, in order to kind of communicate the futility of our work and our effort. We're going to see how creation too follows a sort of repetitive pattern without ever reaching a final goal. These processes in creation that just keep doing the same thing over and over again, but there's no finality. There's no end goal in sight. There's no ultimate purpose. There's no ultimate direction, right? And guess what? Solomon is telling us this because people, our work, the things that we achieve, they pass away, right? They're gone. When I'm gone, everything that I've done is gone, right? I may have, there may be people's lives who may be impacted, but the truth is that fades away, right? That will go away. But the cycles of nature, they just go on. They just go on like we were never here. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. Solomon starts with the sun. Why? Because the sun is a symbol of consistency and power, right? A lot of things in creation depend on the sun, right? We understand that. And every day, Solomon says, the sun rises in the east, moves across the sky, and it sets. And it does the same thing over and over again. And the word he uses here for hurry back is a Hebrew word, sha'af. Sha'af. It literally means a weary, relentless motion. A weary, relentless motion. It's a perpetual race with no rest. It's just this cycle that goes on and on and on and on, and that it never stops. There's no end goal for the sun. The sun will rise and it will set every day. That's what it does. And that's all it does. A repetitive cycle. The sun would seem to be almost exhausted, right? Running the same course day after day and never reaching a goal, never reaching an end. And Solomon is using that to show us that there are many cycles and processes in this life that follow that same pattern. And even the sun, I mean, it's moving incredible distances. It has incredible power, but it's trapped in this predictable cycle. There's no new progress, right? There's no new destination, just a repetitive loop over and over again. And Solomon wants us to see that from a purely earthly perspective, that's exactly how human pursuits are too. Busy, active, constantly returning to the same place. The same place. Now, that you may move into a new house, but the truth of the matter is that in your life, no matter how busy and active you are, you're always returning to the same place. He goes on to talk about the wind. The wind blows to the south and goes to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuit, the wind returns. Now, he goes on from something that is sort of consistent and powerful, and he goes to the wind, something that's what? Not that, right? The wind seems to be free and unpredictable. But Solomon says, well, not really. The wind is not free and unpredictable. It follows the same sort of pattern. Now, some of you may read this and say, well, it's kind of weird, right? When we talk about wind, what do we normally think of? We think of it not going north and south, right? We think of it going west to east. Well, you may not know this, but it follows the jet streams in our case, but there are places in the world where the wind does not go that way. It doesn't go west to east, but it actually can in some of the areas in the Middle East. The wind blows south to north, north to south. And so Solomon says, Unlike the sun that sort of follows this same path always, you have the wind. The wind's path is a little less straightforward, right? It moves directions, blowing north and south, east and west. But even what seems to be free and random is not. The wind is actually blowing in a fixed, repetitive pattern. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuit, the wind returns. And so the image of the wind here is the wind is constantly moving, right? But what? It's never going anywhere. Right? It's not like the wind is like, well, let me get to the east coast of Georgia and I'm going to stop. Right? Or let me get to the border in Syria and I'm going to stop. Or Egypt and I'm going to stop. No, it doesn't work like that, right? That's not the way this thing happens. It's not the way it happens at all. Instead, the wind is moving in a direction, yes, but there's no end point. There's no destination. There's nowhere that it's going. Again, reinforcing the idea of these endless, aimless pursuits, right? You may think you're free to run after whatever you want to run after, but the result is still the same. It's still the same. No matter how far the wind travels or what direction it takes, it ends up always back where it started. Again, pointing us, going back to human pursuits and how elusive they are to us. How many of us think that if I can just be busy enough, then I'll have meaning, I'll have fulfillment? Right? If I just work extra hours, I'm going to get ahead. Sometimes that works out, but most of the times it doesn't, because guess what? When you pursue things under the sun, it's the same repetitive cycle. And so, yes, you may get ahead in your job, but at the expense of what else in your life? You may think you're making headway at work. You may think that your ambitions are being fulfilled. You may think that these projects are getting done. But if there's not a higher purpose to what you're doing, then you're just like the wind. You're just like the wind. Always in motion, but never making it to a meaningful destination. Or like the sun. You may be the most constant person on the planet. You may have a good job, a job where you feel like that you're making progress in something. But if you don't have a purpose beyond this life, a purpose beyond this moment, then Solomon says you don't have a purpose at all. You're just moving in the direction that everybody else is moving in. Every moment of every single day, there are millions of people out there making TikTok videos because why? Because they want to be the next big thing, right? They want to be the next celebrity influencer, right? That's what they want. But you know what always happens to these people? They start off one way, but by the time it's over, completely lost who they are. They're doing things on camera they would never have ever done before. Why? Because they're in this cycle. They feel like, man, I really did it today, right? Mr. Beast, man, I did all this today. Feel really accomplished, right? I have billions of people that watch my videos. And then the next thing, well, buried alive and all this stuff. And then, I mean, look at what happened in his life. I mean, his life is a mess, right? I mean, one of his teammates or whatever they are is transgender and blows the family up, and then he's being sued for all this stuff that all the way that he handles people outside of videos, right? He's in the same cycle everybody else is in. Trying to find meaning and purpose with a perspective under the sun, it just leads you into this giant, circular, repetitive process that never ends. and you never find ultimate fulfillment. He says all streams, verse 7, run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, they'll flow again. To illustrate his point, he turns to the water. He says all streams run into the sea, but the sea is never full. You know that, maybe you don't, I don't know if you know geography or anything like that of the Middle East. You know the Dead Sea, right? The one people go and there's so much, the salt content is so high, if you swallow it, you'll die. Literally, if you swallow a mouthful, you'll die because the mineral content is so high. It's the one that people go in because you can just float, right? You know that the Dead Sea is landlocked, meaning that there's nowhere for the Dead Sea to go. And do you know since the creation account in Genesis chapter 3, so for thousands and thousands of years, the Jordan River, which is a live river, it's living water, it's moving. You know the Jordan River flows into the Dead Sea? And do you know that after thousands and thousands of years, not one time has the Dead Sea overflowed? Do you know that right now, even though the Jordan River is running into the Dead Sea, that the Dead Sea, that the water is receding at astronomical levels, even though it's constantly being poured into? There's a sermon there, but I'm not going to get into it because I don't have time. But that's what Solomon's thinking about. The Dead Sea being fueled, given water by the Jordan River, and yet it's never full. An endless cycle, right? Where rivers pour into oceans and bodies of water. But tell me one person in all of academia and in the sciences that says, hey, we better watch out because the oceans are getting too full. But the water's in well, what about evaporation? Yeah, but evaporation, if you've never been to elementary school and don't know this, evaporation leads to what? Condensation. So it's this, again, this cycle, right, where the water evaporates, it returns to the source, but then the process starts over and over again. Again, the picture that Solomon is giving us is this perpetual motion, this perpetual movement, but never completion, right? It's these cycles that are happening over and over and over again, and no matter how much water flows into the sea, it never gets to the point of being full. Right? The water is never finished moving. There is no finality. There's no end to the process. The water cycle here, it's a picture of humans striving in the exact same way under the sun. If we're looking at our existence on this earth and we think that we can run the race, and we use that term, right, because the Bible uses that term, but when you use it under the sun without an eternal perspective, guess what happens in a race? Generally, you start somewhere, and most of the ones that I've run in have not, walked briskly in. I started in one place, and I went around, and I ended in the same place. Right? Again, a picture of what Solomon is trying to communicate to us. No matter how much effort you put into your work and your ambitions and your relationships, there is going to be a sense of incompletion when you look at it under the sun. When you think, man, I can't find fulfillment in God or in the church, I can't find fulfillment in a relationship with the Lord, I need to find somebody attached to this existence in this world that can bring me fulfillment. And what do? You get into the cycle, right? Where what do? Well, you go out and you serial date. Right? You just keep dating people until you find the right person. But what do? You do the same thing every time, and you end up where? In the same place every time until you meet the one, right? But it's the same thing. It's a never-ending cycle, it seems, sometimes. Rarely rarely in our human pursuits under the sun are we fully satisfied. We work, we labor, we do everything we can to fill our lives with meaning and purpose. The satisfaction and the fulfillment we're looking for is never there. In verse 8, Solomon shifts to our human experience. Verse 8, all things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, the ear not filled with hearing. The word for weariness is a Hebrew word that means burdensome. It means tiresome. It means monotonous. After Solomon looks at the endless cycle of nature, he draws a conclusion. Not just the sun and the wind and the water, but everything in life is marked by this weariness. Again, under the sun, right? But all things, he says. All things, which means there's not a point or part of your life that's not burdened by this. And he says a man can't utter. We can't even express it. The overwhelming nature of the fatigue. It's hard for us to even communicate with words. Have you ever been so frustrated with a situation or circumstance, maybe at work or at home or in a relationship, and you wanted to talk about it, but you couldn't even muster the right words to communicate the frustration? That's what Solomon is talking about. When we view things and we're pursuing life under the sun, and that is our focus, that's our only focus, then man, we're going to be frustrated beyond words, right? No matter how much you try to talk about it, no matter how much you try to explain futility and the weariness of life, no matter how much you try and do that, it just becomes more burdensome because you can't really express it. You want people to understand, but you can't communicate just the frustration that exists within you, but they understand because they feel the same way. Human beings trying to find true satisfaction and fulfillment in the things of this world, it's just not going to happen. We're always going to be dissatisfied and exhausted. And he says the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Listen, this is an illustration of that dissatisfaction, right? Metaphors to represent to us the endless pursuit of knowledge, pleasure, experience, right? The eye is not satisfied with seeing everything. Think about our eyes. I mean, we're constantly looking for new sights, right? New visions, new experiences, but it's never satisfied. Right? There's always something more to see. There's always something we feel we might be missing. We have an insatiable desire, right? An unfulfilled desire for novelty, for discovery. I mean, even when we look at the most beautiful things, the most wonderful things, we're already ready for the next thing. Right? What can I see next that's going to captivate me? We grow tired. We grow tired of what we see. We always want something new. If you don't believe me, then why do things like YouTube and TikTok and Netflix and Hulu and iTunes and TVs and video games, why does that stuff exist if this isn't true? Nor the ear filled with hearing. The ear's always listening for new sounds, new words, new ideas, but it's never content. Again, think about our craving, right? For knowledge, for wisdom, for understanding. We listen, we learn, we absorb, and yet we're never satisfied. There's always more to hear. There's always more to know. And so we kind of work through this perpetual cycle of listening and longing and learning, but it's never fulfilled. No matter how much we hear or how much we see, there's always a craving for more. A picture that Solomon is using to show us the restlessness that exists when when you are pursuing the emptiness of trying to find fulfillment and satisfaction in this world. Solomon tells us, even history shows us this. What has been is what will be. What has been done is what will be done. You know what that essentially is? It's this. He says in a second, there's nothing new under the sun. That's exactly right. That's exactly right, because what's happened, history repeats itself, right? We've heard that phrase many times. That's exactly what he's saying here. Now, the details may change, right? The details may change, but the fundamental patterns of human life never change. Right? There's nothing new under the sun. And even though people may invent new things or they may come up with new ideas, that the basic human experience behind that doesn't change. Listen, when wireless technology came out, when you could pick up a phone without a cord and call people, people had an incredible feeling that the world was changing. Do you know that feeling was not new? Do you know when they first laid the telegraph lines and that first telegraph went across, do you know the people then felt the exact same way? When that person who had the first phone in their hand and they picked up that phone and someone across the state or the country was on the other end, they felt that same exact feeling. So yeah, the details may change, but the experience is exactly the same. The same sort of feeling of accomplishment, right, that happened then, has happened and will happen many, many more times in the future. But everything remains the same. Because when the telephone was invented, guess what happened the day after it came to fruition? He got up and went back to work. Right? He got up and went back to work. And Solomon says, listen, if you think I'm wrong, if there is a thing of which is said, see, this is new. It's already been in the ages before us. Solomon says this. It's not new. It's not new. Somebody thought of it before. But the way that humanity works is, oh, how quickly we forget. Oh, how quickly we forget. You know, the communication has been happening since Genesis chapter 3. Incredible advances in communication happening since Genesis chapter 3. Right? The earth was formless and void, and then it's full of life. Right? The earth, through nature, is communicating with the plants, the animals. Then God is communicating with His creation and humanity. There's conversations that are happening. And then what happens? Right? The nations are spread out, and what? There's still communication happening. There's written language. There's all of those things that are being developed and happening. And so, is communication new? Well, no. Has it changed? Yeah. But do we pat ourselves on the back? Well, no, because it's not really anything new. Right? When this cell phone became a thing, like, it's really not exciting. Right? Because it just means that instead of having to go to my house and pick up the corded phone, right, I can dial from my pocket, but it's not new. And this is an iPhone, I don't know, it's one of the new ones, whatever it is, but like, it's even not new. Right? They make the camera take clearer pictures, and they call it it's new, right? Well, how many times in the past from cameras when I was a kid where you pushed a button and it spit the thing out, to going to CVS and Walgreens to have pictures printed from a card or actual film, to where we are now. It doesn't change anything. The details change absolutely, but it's not new. It's just that we forget all the ground that's been laid behind us. And we get a high and mighty thinking, man, I have come up with something new. The truth of the matter is that the majority of modern invention and modern technology is born out of the technology and modernity that came before us. As society grew, as people grew in wisdom and knowledge. And so it's not really new. And even if it is new, it has roots in the past. History's filled with repetitive cycles, with philosophy, right? The whole deconstruction movement that exists now, it's not new. It's existed for all of time. They just called it something different now. But it's not new. It just comes in different forms, right? Bell bottoms. In the 90s, they died out, and then in the 90s, it became flared, which were just another name for bell bottoms, right? I mean, not as bell bottomy. Flared was a little more tame, but it's the same thing. Not new. It's just a reinvention of that which has come before us. He says in verse 11, there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. He says we just forget. And so the picture that he's painting, and this will be the last thing I say, the picture that he's painting is when you're looking at things from an earthly perspective. If you think that every day your goal to find purpose and meaning is to get up and go through the grind, right? To get up and just kill it at work and then kill it in your relationship at home. If you do that, Solomon says to you, you will be unfulfilled. Your name may end up in a book, but guess what? It's going to get replaced by someone else. You may be talked about, but there's a generation that's going to come after you. And his point is not to leave us in despair. Solomon's point is, I want you to understand the difference between looking at life from under the sun, from a purely human, earthly perspective, and the drastic and vast difference between looking at things under the sun and looking and finding meaning in the one who is above the sun. The one who is sovereign over creation. That's Solomon's ultimate contention for everyone, is to stop looking here and look there. Because here you're going to find endless cycles that leave you in the exact same place, in heartache and despair, with tears and unfulfillment. But if you look to Him, you will find joy. You will find peace that surpasses all understanding. You will find hope. You will find life, and you will find life abundantly. But it's only going to happen not under the sun, but looking to the one who's over it. But the only way you see the true value of the one who's over it if you understand the reality of what it looks like to be under it. And Solomon's talking to us in a way that is gut-wrenching and hard because he wants us to see that in light of the beauty of who God is. Let's pray, and we'll be done tonight. Father, we thank you for your grace and your mercy. We pray, Lord, that you would remind us of the harsh realities of what it means to live in this world with a worldly perspective, but also the beauty of what it looks like when we fix our eyes on you. That we can have purpose and meaning. That all of these things that could bring despair instead bring life and life abundantly because of you. Lord, may we fix our eyes on you today and every day. In Jesus' name, amen.